Yes, peace and love, wonderful family. I do hope that everyone is doing fantastic. And this being on the 13th day of the month of February, the year 2026, I do hope that everything is coming up just fine. And I do hope that if things are not looking up, I do hope that very, very soon things will actually shape up. So, welcome to this Black History Month special right here on this particular platform. And in case you haven't subscribed, please make sure you do. In case you haven't turned on the notifications, please make sure that you also do. It is very, very important that you do. And make sure that you also follow us on our different social media platforms. We are on X. You can follow Money Spikes on X. You can also follow Hosted by Spikes on Instagram, and that would be actually a wonderful thing for you to do. So, welcome to the show. This particular one, we shall be discussing about the Black History Month. And the topic for conversation today will be the whitewashing of African history by the colonizers. That is our topic for today, the whitewashing of African history by the different European powers. You know, the funny thing is that if you look at the education system right here on the continent of Africa, and even in most other places, because it has been adopted from the European system, you do find that whatever history that you get to learn as Black history, that is whatever they have actually put down or they have actually put out for you to learn. But you realize, for example, with the Kenyan system, when you get to learning history in your schools, you only learn about the history from 1490 something, from 1498 onwards, and that is because the first ship by Vasco da Gama actually arrived on the East African coast around that particular time in 1498. And before that, you do not learn what was happening in Africa before 1498. Whatever you just learn is that Vasco da Gama arrived with the Portuguese. They actually interacted with the Bantu people of the East African coast and also the Arabs that were doing commerce and trade in that particular region. And then you're told that from that they introduced things like maize, they introduced other crops on the continent. But before that, you are not told about what were people doing before 1498 on the African continent. So when you're talking about Black history, or when you're talking about even African history, most of what we have as a recorded history is mostly from the perspective of the European, and that actually it doesn't happen by chance. It is simply because even the education system that you have on the continent, and even for most of the parts of the world, that education system was actually institutionalized by them. It was actually made up by them, and therefore they will not teach you your own real Black history unless you decide to do that for yourself. And that is the biggest challenge that you'll find with most with different places. But apart from that, right now we are talking about we are living in the age of information and technology. So if you do not take it upon yourself or the responsibility of learning your own history, even right now when you do have all these different technology, all these different resources that you can use to learn your own history, then you cannot come up and blame the European and say, oh, this is what the European has done. Because right now, we do have so many resources and so many platforms where you can actually get to involve yourself with or indulge in learning your own African history or learning your own Black history. Because you know for a fact that most of world history is African history. And if you look at, for example, the artifacts, for example, if you go back to Egypt and you look at the civilizations that were existing in Kemet, you realize that most of the artifacts that have been taken and placed in European museums, these are actually African artifacts. Some of them coming from Kemet, ancient Kemet or Egypt. Some of them coming from areas like Abyssinia. Others coming from areas like Benin, which is a present-day Nigeria, and other parts of the continent of Africa. All of those items taken into European museums. But you get to ask yourself, what will remain if all these African artifacts are taken away from these European museums? Some of them are in Germany, others are in Belgium, others are in Britain, others are in the US and other places. You get to realize that if these artifacts are taken away from the museums, what happens to remain is mostly empty spaces, because most of what is labeled as history is mostly pertaining to African history and actually originates from the African continent. There has been a very, very big tussle when it comes to getting some of those artifacts back. And I'm talking about the British returning the artifacts to countries such as Kenya, other artifacts being returned to places such as Benin from maybe Germany or Belgium all these are the different people that have looted our African artifacts, it becomes a very, very lengthy process. And even when you're talking about some of those artifacts that were taken from the continent of Africa, some of them were already destroyed, maybe perhaps through fires or perhaps through other happenings that did see the destruction of some of these particular artifacts. And therefore, we cannot go back and find what was happening or what was it that we could learn from some of these particular artifacts. So for our conversation for today, I think we were hoping to be joined by a brother of mine known as Jay Samlin. But I think there's a bit of connection hits, but we do hope that once he is able to join us, he will join us and we can have a bit of this particular discussion, which is very, very important through this Black History Month. Personally, if you get to ask me, I always tell you that we cannot just have 1 month in February and come up and say, oh, now this is a Black History Month. I think Black history ought to be taught each and every other day, if not every other month. You cannot just have February, single it out and say, oh, this is when we ought to learn our African history. We have seen the opposition, a whole lot of opposition towards, the teaching of African history, the teaching of Black history. And then we do have what you know as the CRC, or the critical race theory. And I think what has happened is that some of the truths that are exposed from the learning of Black history, with the introduction of the critical race theory, they want to make sure that all this knowledge and all these truths are actually hidden, such that you will not know the atrocities done against our people through history, because it has been repeated time and again. A whole lot of history. We're talking about genocide. We're talking about massacres. And when this history is hidden, then people would not know, our people would not know how to move appropriately or how to act appropriately, which is the biggest challenge. But for the case of our conversation for today, I want to talk about very important aspects, or very important or key aspects of the erasure and the stealing of African history and the whitewashing of African and Black history. One of the things that has happened is that there have been the erasure of advanced civilizations. And this has not been done just by chance. This has been done, there has been something that has been orchestrated very, very well, so that you do find that different civilizations have actually been sort of erased. You look at empires like the Mali Empire, the Kingdom of the Great Zimbabwe. Some of these have been often ignored and falsely attributed to non-African origins. So you do find, if you're talking about the origin of some of like the Kingdom of the Great Zimbabwe, they will actually come up and say that, oh, these were people who are not of African origin, who came to this particular place and they set up this civilization. And they will say, or perhaps these might have been people from a foreign area and they came up and settled in this area. And these are the ones that we can attribute this particular settlement to, or this particular civilization to, which is actually just a way of making it seem as if Africans or Black people have not been capable of actually coming up and making up great civilizations. That is what has been preached through the years. And even like I was saying a little bit earlier on, before 1498, when we did have, the Europeans arrive at the East African coast, for the case of our learning in Kenya, we are not told what was happening in the Congo Kingdom. It is very scarcely, you find very scarce information about what was happening in the Congo Kingdom, which existed before the arrival of the European. Or you will be taught very little about what was happening in another kingdom. For example, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, or even, for example, the Mali Empire. We know about the Mali Empire because we still have Timbuktu today. And Timbuktu, this is a place where we did have the origin or the original universities anywhere in the world. If you go into studying in the history of Timbuktu in Mali, present-day Mali, you realize that the original universities where a whole lot of learning was done was actually in Timbuktu in Mali. And this is where you can find a whole lot of manuscripts. Most of them, of course, they were stolen. Others were destroyed. But for those that were actually preserved, you will get to find out that there was a whole lot of history that was taught. There was a rich culture, and this rich culture also encompassed learning. And this was organized learning in an institution where people came from very, very far away. And these people came from as far as, all different parts of the world. I'm talking about even from North Africa. They went all the way into West Africa, into this area of Timbuktu, where they were doing their learning. But of course, what has happened because of the whitewashing of African and Black history, what has happened is that the significance of our own history has actually been downplayed. We are seen as people that have come up and that people that have been uncivilized for all of our history. But they will not tell you about the Kush Empire, the kingdom of the Great Zimbabwe, the Congo Kingdom, even the kingdoms that were next door. Right here in Uganda, we did have the Bangana kingdoms, and these were kingdoms that were operating, and they did conduct trade and commerce with other kingdoms. And there was the movement of African people all over the continent. They would move even beyond, even outside, because there were people that were keen on business. And what has been taught in our classes in the recent past is that the African has been actually civilized by the European, and were it not for the European, we would not have the civilization as we had it. The case is actually made when you look at the Congo. In the Congo, we did have King Leopold who came into the Congo, and actually in his letters, he was saying that his mission or his greatest goal was actually to go and civilize Congo, but they will not tell you about the civilization that was happening before King Leopold was there. Because King Leopold, I do believe for me, he was going to extract materials and all the resources that he could get in the Congo for his own personal gain and on behalf of the imperialists that he was serving at that particular time, to make sure that he takes as much resources from the Congo and send them over back to Belgium and other European nations, so that he can enrich himself and also he can enrich his compatriots. That was exactly what was happening. But in his letters, he actually comes up and says that he is coming to civilize the backward people of Africa. But history will not actually note King Leopold II talking about any good or any civilization that had come up, or the positive history of the African people. So what has happened is that there has been the erasure of advanced civilizations, and of course, another thing is that there has been the distinction through colonial education. So apart when African countries gained their independence, and even not just on the African continent, I'm talking about for countries even in the Caribbean, when the countries gained their independence, they did not formulate their own education systems from scratch. What happened is that they actually embraced or adopted the European system of education, and therefore, whatever the European would have would have wanted you to learn, that is exactly what you would learn. And you cannot expect that someone has actually colonized you, enslaved you, and they want you to better yourself through their education system. That is a system that has been made especially for them. So, with that particular kind of a mindset, you realize that what is taught on the African continent is actually from a Eurocentric perspective, not from an Afrocentric perspective. And therefore, you will learn that everything that you are being taught is mostly preparing you to actually get in line in that particular system, where you do find that it is a global system of white supremacy, and you will not find your footing through learning a system that is Eurocentric and not Afrocentric. And that becomes another very, very big challenge when you're talking about even the Black history. Where has our history gone, or where is our history hidden? That is a question I would like to ask, and I would hope that you would like to engage me when it comes to learning and learning more about our Black history. Our history, when we talk about our history, you do find that there has also been a misrepresentation. There has been a very, very grave misrepresentation in academia and media. And this is just by way of making sure that you will actually be put in a system where you would feel inferior, because there has been a whole lot of misrepresentation, especially in media. There have been tools like Hollywood, or you do find Hollywood for all these years. They want, when it comes to the depiction of Africa, for example, in films, if there's a film that is about the history of Egypt, you will not find Black people actually being casted for those particular roles. You'll find the Arabs and other people being casted for the roles of the Africans that are actually involved in the civilization of Egypt being white. So you do find that through this media representation, the image or the history of the African is actually erased, and it is actually also misrepresented in that particular way. And this is just a way to make sure that through the education and through the media, you remain thinking that you have not achieved greatness in the past. You remain thinking that you have never done anything of significance, and that and that civilization has been brought to you from outside. While as in real actual facts, it is the African people or the black people that have gone and civilized everyone else, and then gotten back to the continent and continued with the thing. For example, when talking about the Moors, the Moors actually did go into Europe, and they actually ruled Europe for a very, very long time. And apart from ruling Europe, they also civilized the place. There were things like diseases, there were things like a whole lot of uncouth things going on in Europe. But when the Moors were there, the Moors ruled the places like Spain. The Moors, they civilized these particular places. But that particular bit of history, you'll find it not gaining or having any significance and not having attention when it comes to what is taught as a black history, because for some reason, they would want you to keep on thinking that you are actually uncivilized and that you are actually one way backward person. But nonetheless, apart from that, there is a whole issue of the justification of slavery and colonization. And for people that want you to think that slavery was to be justified or colonization was to be justified, they will actually come up and hide your own history and say that we came into Africa and colonized you people. We had to colonize you to civilize, to make you civil. But who is actually making who civil? Who is actually making who civil? That is a question. That we get to ask. Who is actually making who civil, and what is going on with that? For me, if you get to ask me, the justification of slavery and justification of colonization, the only way they know it was about resources, it was about control, it was about power. It had nothing to do with civilizing anyone. It had nothing to do with making anything better for anyone, for the colonized or for the enslaved. What was happening with that particular situation is that they wanted power, and you gain power through the control of resources. And once you are able to control resources, and you also control the monetary or the financial global monetary system, then it means that you can actually make up narratives and push your own propaganda through media, through education, and through other things, simply because you have power. But the question is, we as black people globally, do we have an interest in yielding power, or do we have an interest in going back to that place of global prominence and actually yielding power? That is a big, big question. For Dr. Amos Wilson, who of course had transitioned some years ago, he had actually given us as a black people globally, through his book, The Blueprint to Black Power, very, very essential strategies and key points of how we can get back to that particular place. But one of the things in which Dr. Amos Wilson was talking about is a psychological aspect of our people waking up and breaking free from the mental shackles of what the psychological trauma of oppression, the psychological trauma of oppression that has come about because of slavery, that has come about because of colonization on the African continent. Even people till now, they still have that kind of fear, and they are shaken up simply because they do feel that there is nothing much that you can do. You do not have power to do anything, and therefore things remain to be just the way they were. But apart from that, he was also talking about the issue of education system. You cannot expect to actually free yourself from mental slavery by using the same script that the colonizers have set for you. You have to break free from that, and you would actually have to open up your mind to actually making your own system, a system that actually just works for you. That is my own personal thinking, and from his book, which is a blueprint to Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson, he has actually explained that very, very well. When you talk about even the issue of not having your own media, and not having not having control of your own or having any media, You will be told that we do have media like, oh, this is BET, or this is Black Entertainment Television, or this and that. But if you look at if they have any interest in terms of maybe perhaps educating and empowering Black people to be able to own their own narratives, that will not happen. At the end of the day, that will actually not happen. But yes, apart from that, that is why Black history has been hidden. All our history has actually been erased so that there would be a justification for slavery and colonization and other atrocities that has been done in the name of we did it to actually better them or we did it to actually civilize them. That is the biggest problem. But apart from that, our own history has actually also been erased, or there has been a whitewashing of our own history simply because of cultural appropriation, which they want to take it and twist the narrative, and not just the narrative, but make it seem as our history is they're doing. If you look at Egypt, for example, with the pyramids and also the Sphinx in Egypt, you'll find that not just the Sphinx, but also the other sculptures in Egypt, those big sculptures they couldn't steal. I think they wouldn't be able to move them because they were heavy. There were lots and lots of tons, and they wouldn't be able to move them and steal them from and take them from one place to another. But what did happen is that their noses were blown, so you wouldn't find any of those particular artifacts with their noses because these were noses that look like your nose and my nose. You as an African, as a black person anywhere, it looks like your nose. It looks like my nose. So therefore, you do find that there has been these culture appropriation, and it is going on even right now. For example, even if you look at, for example, some music genres that were actually originated and actually made up by our people. What has happened is that some of those particular music genres, there has been an invasion of the same, and cultural appropriation has happened, so that you realize that what used to be black music now has actually been infiltrated and it has been overturned, and you would think that it has nothing to do with our people. But you all know that when it comes to creativity, we are the originators. Black people are the originators of this music. And for them, they would only be consumers. But what has happened is that they have also taken up that particular music and claimed that they have made it or they have originated it. And apart from that, we also know that whitewashing of Black history has actually also been propelled simply because of the removal of the artifacts. Like I was saying a little bit earlier on, the removal of artifacts. And these artifacts were not just removed and peaceably, they were stolen. And you would find places where they're like, there was maybe royalties. For example, in Benin. In Benin, they used to have a system where we did have even royalties. We did have things like gold accessories for the royalties in that particular place. And most of these particular artifacts that would show that there was even a hierarchy. There was the rulers of those particular places, and there were the items that were used for different ceremonies. Some of those particular artifacts were stolen. And I was saying, if you go to the British Museum, if you go to other museums in Germany, if you go to other museums in maybe perhaps Canada, if you go to other museums, maybe perhaps in Belgium, in Spain, or even in Portugal, you would find that most of these particular artifacts on a display, they have nothing to do with the European. Some of them, African governments have done a big job in terms of claiming these particular resources and wanting to have the control of these resources once again. But what you get to realize is that most of that has not been returned. And I'm also happy to see that the African people are also waking up to want to claim their own history, because for a very, very long time, people have been detached. People have actually been very, very much detached from the reality of our history, to a level that our own history has been demonized, and we have also bought into that lie that the African was actually a very, very bad person, and therefore you would not want to relate with that particular kind of a history where you were told you were this and that, you're into this and that and other things that would seem to be uncivil. That is a problem that has happened, so that people have also detached from their own history. Right now, like I was saying, you cannot blame and just keep the blame solely on the European. I think right now, every person, every black person has a right or has a responsibility to educate themselves and to look for the knowledge, because knowledge is not given. You also have to have an interest in acquiring this particular knowledge. Knowledge is actually acquired, And for example, we did have the young brother from Cincinnati, if I'm not mistaken. This was I Show Speed. I Show Speed recently, he had the opportunity to tour different African countries. I think maybe about seven. I'm not sure how many countries that he toured, but I'm sure it's more than seven. So when he toured these particular countries, the very almost at the very final bit, he did make a tour of Egypt. And Egypt is of much interest because we do have the civilization of in ancient Kemet and all the dynasties up to the 25th dynasty. I would say that the brother, he did a very, very great job simply because he was able to show a little bit of the tour to Egypt and also tour the Grand Museum in Egypt, where you could see the history. And this is African history. Sometimes people will say, oh, these are the Arabs, or these are the Greeks, these are the Romans, these are the who and that. It is everyone else apart from the African. That is actually one big lie, because if you go to places such as Sudan, you will find pyramids in Sudan as well. You will find pyramids also in other parts of the world, and you will know that these were actually inspired and created by the black the black man. And we might sit down and argue, oh, this was an alien civilization where they came from this particular side, they made the pyramids, and then they disappeared, they did all this and that, and then they went back. That's a whole lot of a bullshit. Even as much as if you try to dance around the whole issue, it comes back to reality, and you realize that African history, we need to go back and own our own history, because, like I was saying, the African, if we talk about the African, talk about maybe perhaps the African in West Africa, in Nigeria, and you tell him about the greatness of the civilization in maybe perhaps the Kush Empire, or perhaps in Kemet, he or she does not see themselves in that image. We would see much of ourselves in an image of maybe perhaps in the inferiority complex. In the inferiority complex status, where we do think that we are subhuman for some reason, but that is mostly because of the damage that has been done through the whitewashing of our African history. Unless we own up to our own history and actually do dig and research, then we would actually be doing the wrong thing. We would actually continue living in the lie, and would actually be perpetuating, because we also play part in terms of perpetuating these global white supremacy system. We as the African, the African, the black person, the black man, the black woman, we also play part in it, because we cannot talk about, or this system is rigged in the favor of the white person. We cannot say that, simply because we also have a role to play in that. And if you do ask me what role we have played in that, we have continued to stay, or we have continued to live in a way that seems to say that we have already settled with a lie. Because we do say, if a lie is told too many times, it starts to sound like the truth. And what has happened is that the African has been told too many lies, and we have taken all those lies to be the truth. And that is a sad reality that we are actually facing on the ground. But my opinion is, unless we take up the responsibility of actually educating our own children and the generations to come about our own history, then we shall continue to perpetuate the same kind of a mindset of coming second, or being at the bottom. That will be the same kind of a mindset. If you not educate your children, if you not take up the responsibility to educate the other generation, the other coming generations of our African history, then it means that we are going to continue perpetuating the same thing. And also, we are too much divided to actually agree on anything. That is also another doing of our own people. As a black person, even when it comes to identity, people want to have any other identity apart from the African identity. You lack pride in we lack pride in our own identity. And therefore, being fragmented in such kind of a way, you find someone says, oh, I'm Dominican, this, I am a Spanish, I am this and that, all these other things people claiming different identities, any other identity apart from the African identity, that also serves to our own detriment, because we are not able to be united behind anything. And therefore, you will go your own way, I will go my own way. I will come up and say, oh, the Africans from they call the motherland, they are this and that. You come up and say the Black Americans from the states, they are this and that. Then you go to the Caribbean, you say the people of the Caribbean, Jamaica, Haiti, they are this and that. Then go to the South America, say the people of Brazil, the black people of Brazil, they are this and that. A whole lot of a division, but that has been divide and conquer, which is to our own detriment and to our own doing. We actually need to wake up. We actually need to actually embrace our own identity, and not just our own identity, but also our own history at the end of the day. I think we shall be ending this particular segment from here right now, but we shall be continuing. Yeah, we shall be continuing with these same particular conversations. But before we get into that, I think I would say, how do we get to reclaim our own African history? How do we get to reclaim our own African history? Because it is very, very important that we reclaim our own African history or our own Black history, because we are the original people, and we have come to begin to realize that there is a need for us to be united, and there is a need for us to reclaim our own history, because from that you can learn from we can learn from the past, and we can also build on that information to actually use it to steer our agenda in the future as a Black people globally, because it is very, very important. One of the things I think we need to do, and we actually need to look at very, very seriously, is actually reforming the education, reforming the maybe making reforms in the education sector. Because if we continue in the same education that has been Eurocentric, then it means you shall continue learning the same life. And I was discussing with my brother, and I was telling him that when it comes to learning things might be easy, but unlearning these things becomes the trick. Unlearning these things becomes the trick. And I'm talking about the lies. A lie told too many times, it becomes, when you're growing up, you have a whole lot of thirst for knowledge, and therefore you take in a whole lot of information from this and that and that and that as you're growing up. So what you were taught as a child, and the same beliefs have been reinforced, or the same knowledge has been, quote unquote knowledge, has been reinforced. It means by the time you're becoming an adult, even if the contrary, even if facts are presented to you, and you're told, okay, you were lied to, what now you need to do is, this is the rightful way. It becomes very, very difficult to unlearn and to move from those habits that you have actually gained from the knowledge that you have actually acquired, which might be wrong. So when you talk about even getting our knowledge, our history back, I think there has to be critical reforms that have to be made in the education systems. Otherwise, we shall be talking about the same thing day in, said the same thing day out. We shall be talking about, this is what we have been taught from the Eurocentric perspective, but the agenda for them through that knowledge system is to continue having us have that mindset of getting a pipeline where we continue to work for them, and mostly they will continue perpetuating their system of a global Black supremacy through our ignorance, because I would not call that education. I would call it ignorance to a very, very big extent. But apart from that, it is also important that we realize another way which we can actually reclaim our own history is by preservation of our cultural heritage. If we want to preserve our cultural heritage, then if you want to preserve our own history, then we have to make a big point. We have to make a very, very big point of actually preserving our own cultural and historical heritage. I'm talking about some of the areas right now. Some of them have been protected by the UNESCO. They have been protected by the UNESCO Heritage Site Protection Act. But we cannot give that is them, that is the UN, but we cannot just also leave that to them. We also have to come up and take it as our own responsibility to preserve some of these heritage sites and cultural heritage sites, because if people are able to tour to these particular places and see and learn, then it would actually be very, very much important. I'm talking about the preservation of our historical sites, the preservation of our manuscripts, the preservation of oral traditions, the preservation of artifacts. When we look at African knowledge and African, even for example, the West African Dogons, the Dogons of West Africa, most of what was passed on from one generation to another generation, these happen to be through oral traditions, either through music, either through dances that went along with the music, and also through stories that were told by from one generation and passed on from one generation to another. So when you do not have an interest in preservation of these the oral traditional knowledge, then it becomes very, very difficult. Oral traditions, it becomes very, very difficult for us to talk about preservation and reclaiming our own Black history. That would not actually happen. It would be, it would be very, very difficult. But apart from that, I did say yes. Even manuscripts. I was saying that we did have manuscripts from ancient Kemet. We did have manuscripts from Timbuktu in Mali, present day Mali. We did have other sites, for example, the walls in the Great Zibambo Kingdom. These walls were very, very well constructed, but sometimes because of time, the way as time goes by, you do find that there is a dilapidation over these particular sites because of things like the weather patterns changing, maybe heavy rains and things like that. So there has to be an interest in terms of reconstructing or really just preserving these particular sites or preserving these particular places, so that we can have them for the future posterity. But apart from that, we need to challenge colonial narratives, because if you never challenge the narrative and you just take the information as it is told to you, then it means that you cannot have your own Black history. You would not know your own original history, because you have been told that you are this, you are that, and this and that. For them, they have written many books. There are many films that have been made. And I would say they are resources, but these resources have been made from the Eurocentric perspective. As I was saying a little bit early on, they are not made for your benefit. Even from the narratives that I'll share, most of these narratives, they do not serve to, they do not offer you any benefit. But apart from that, another way in which we can reclaim our own African history is actually by also making sure that we invest in community history projects. Sometimes you've heard about, oh, there's a museum being built here, or this and that being built there. This is another project. Most of the time, we do find that our people are scheming and scamming, which is a big, big problem. They will be scheming, they will be scamming, and then you're told these are money we are raising for this particular project, but eventually we do not see that come to fruition. What happens is that it hardly happens. It hardly happens, and that is a big, big problem that we do have in terms of us trying to reclaim or have control of our own narratives, which is very, very important. First and foremost, like I did say, we have to actually, the thing is, you cannot talk about Black history while we as a Black people even don't want to face or don't want to embrace our own identity. So how do you have a Black history? Well, even the Black people themselves don't want to have or to identify as a Black people. Apart from that, we need to be united. We cannot talk about reclaiming our own history and reclaiming our own roots that our history is rooted in greatness. It's not rooted in pain and colonization and slavery. Because what happens also, most people now talk about Black history as pertaining to the era of history and the transatlantic slave trade onwards. But Black history is not slavery. Black history is not colonization. We do have that is just a facet or a period. But if you go back to Black history, which we shall be doing on this particular channel, we shall realize that there is so much. There is a whole lot of greatness that is actually to be celebrated, that is actually to be even passed on, even through different traditions like oral traditions and even written tradition or written ways from our generation to the other generations. And it's very, very important in that regard. I want to thank those that have joined us for this particular segment. Thank you so much. We truly value and appreciate your support and your company. In case you want to shoot an email or reach out via social media, yes, you're much welcome to do so. You can write to monyejispikes@gmail.com. You can also find me via Instagram. Just write to hosted by Spikes on Instagram. And once you do, I will be more than glad to engage with you and maybe find also ways of getting more people to engage with us right here and also to build. Because, like I did say, unity. United we stand, but divided we fall. So if we are united, then we will be able to do much more. If we are divided, then it means like you're pulling from that side, I'm pulling from this side, another person is pulling from that side, and then we cannot have anything. We cannot not build. We cannot have anything to say or to claim that this is what you have done or this is why this is the way we are headed. And I always do say, unless we do have unity, and not just unity from one side, unless we have unity, for example, like I was saying, in the Caribbean, on the continent, the motherland, in the USA, in the South of America, like in Brazil, unless we do have that unity and see ourselves as one people, then divided we shall remain conquered. That is exactly the truth of the matter. Divided, we shall remain conquered, and we might not be able to actually achieve anything. At the end of the day, we shall continue to be trampled upon, and we shall remain at the bottom, which is a very, very sad reality. Unless we are united, then we shall continue to remain at the bottom, which is actually a disservice to ourselves, because we are not made. The original man is not made to be at the bottom. Actually, the system is actually rigged. It's supposed to be the other way. So when you're talking about, our people do not even realize the greatness that they do have within themselves and the greatness that they would have to achieve by actually uniting, then I think we shall remain behind. We shall continue to actually be on the receiving side, which is to our own, our very own disservice. Thank you so much. My name is Spikes, and like I did say, in case you want to connect, reach out, hosted by Spikes on IG, and you can also find me on X, which is Monyeji Spikes on X, and what other platform? And make sure you subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, please make sure you do. We would love to invite you to join us on our subsequent episodes right here on this particular show. It would be wonderful to have you tune in. Much peace and love. I want to wish you a happy and a productive rest of your weekend. I do know that there's a whole lot of shenanigans that go on with Valentine's, but I'm not into that myself personally. But anyhow, I want to wish you a happy and a productive rest of the weekend. Make sure that you connect with us on our subsequent episodes. And in case you haven't subscribed, it will be very, very important that you subscribe. And you can also share these. Invite a friend, invite a colleague, invite a family member. Let's just connect and unite on this particular platform, because it is very, very, very important that we unite as a people and we work together towards the reawakening of our African consciousness, and also uniting as our Black people globally to get to a place of global prominence once again. Much peace and love. Till next time, I want to wish you a happy and a productive rest of the day. I would say peace and love. Kwaheri.